Welcome to the Rational Optimist Podcast, your weekly dose of breakthroughs and insights that should be front page news. He's Stephen McBride. I'm Dan Steinhardt. Coming up, we look at the revolution now underway in medicine that's been ignited by AI, why man-made diamonds have surpassed natural diamonds in the U.S. and why that's important. And we look at the results of the biggest universal basic income study ever conducted. Stephen, you are bulled up on biotech this week.
I certainly am. There's a lot happening. One recent study, MIT scientists developed an AI system, kind of think about it like a cousin to ChatGPT, and it predicted a person's likelihood of developing lung cancer up to 6 years in advance just using a low-dose CT scan. This is it's like every week I'm coming across amazing things happening in biotech. So I think we're on the cusp of something truly extraordinary here.
Yeah, it seems like there's been an accumulation of breakthroughs in biotech lately. I think biotech is tough because the breakthroughs don't always sound as earth-shattering as like November 2022, ChatGPT. Okay, now we have a computer that can talk to you like as if it's a human. Amazing, everyone gets it, consumer application. Biotech's tougher because it's like we have this drug that helps with a subtype of pancreatic cancer and only works 10% of the time. It's like it's incredible. It's incredible in its progress, but it's like slow and incremental like that. So the stories don't capture people's attention like a lot of breakthroughs do. But just the sheer accumulation of these breakthroughs that have been happening lately is really exciting.
Maybe you can talk about why this is happening. I feel like, as you said, slow progress in biotech. It's not just the actual developing the invention, but then you have to go and get it approved. It seems like we're starting to see a huge uptick in the pace of innovations, and it's all around AI, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk the entire show about this. One of the reasons that it seems to be making such a difference is early detection. Like AI seems to be able to read X-rays or MRI scans and more accurately and more early pick up on like small tumors in the lungs, for example, that a team of human doctors might not see or might not see all the time. And the earlier you find a disease, the more treatment options there are. So that simple change seems to make a huge difference. It's like the old saying, like, do you want to know when you're going to die? Would you want to know when you're going to die? And my answer is, well, is there anything I can do about it? And so there's now ways to detect Alzheimer's a lot earlier than there used to be, other brain diseases. And the earlier you're able to detect them, the more you can do about them, which is super important.
Right. University of Cambridge researchers, I think they developed a test to identify potential Parkinson's treatment 10 times faster and for much less cost than it takes today. And of course that means that you can, if you find cures in months instead of years, that's going to make a big difference to those people's lives. I think the big breakthrough for me here is that you're taking something that's really, really costly and time intensive, like having to go for this range of scans and see all these specialist doctors, and whether it's in America or Ireland or wherever, it seems like there's just a shortage of that. It's not like you can book an appointment and go tomorrow in a lot of cases. I know my father-in-law had to get a test and it was like 6 weeks. Like, what are we doing here? 6 weeks. Whereas AI, it seems, automates and speeds up a lot of that process. So basically these systems can understand a huge amount of data, and if you train them on, say, 1 million X-rays that are to do with lung cancer, then you can go in, you can get your X-ray, and it can just infer the results. So that seems to be the big jump that we're seeing here.
So they've always said, don't Google your symptoms, because if you Google your symptoms, if you have a headache and you Google it, you're gonna come out thinking you have brain cancer, right? That seems to have been turned on its head with AI. So we have this story about a woman named Susan Sheridan. Half of her face was partially paralyzed and she had facial droop, and she went to the emergency room and the doctors told her, don't worry about it, it's benign, you're fine. She goes home, talks to ChatGPT about it. ChatGPT tells her, you probably have Bell's palsy. You should go back to the hospital. So she does, tells the doctors that, and they say, you're right. and they give her treatment, and that's important because Bell's palsy requires urgent treatment to avoid lasting damage.
You are going to see so many cases like that. Do you remember last year when ChatGPT 4 came out? There was a thread on Twitter that saved a guy. The guy had a sick dog, and basically the vet kept pawing him off, telling him there was nothing wrong, and GPT essentially saved his dog's life. You are going to see so many instances of this, and I think it's such, again, just back to what we were saying before, you need to trek to a doctor. That's like a huge hurdle. You're telling me I have to take time off work and I have to book an appointment and do all these things. Now we're getting to a place where you can just whip out your phone and tell it your symptoms. Or, you know, in the future, you're going to be able to maybe take like I noticed these AI systems being developed that can detect disease just from a photo or you know, other things, or even there's computers that can smell now. In the future, you could see this being like a real first line of defense, right?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't sound as exciting as like cancer killing shots, but it's probably even more impactful, just being able to find diseases a lot earlier. So you've written about how you think eventually smartphone cameras will be able to scan your retina and tell you if you have a lot of different diseases. Or a smartphone might come with a breathalyzer that you can breathe it into it once a week, and it can tell you if you have early symptoms of certain diseases. That kind of stuff is so important because, like, one of the biggest health problems for women is breast cancer. But you have to go to the doctor, and you have to have a mammogram, and like, how about prostate cancer for men? Like, we don't get it checked as often as we should because it's not comfortable to get it checked, right? So if you're able to check these things on a more regular, less intrusive basis, I think it's huge.
I think the big thing here is going to be the acceptance of this into the hospitals and the clinics. It seems like the technology is way ahead of where the kind of acceptance of these things is. All the things that we talked about today, most of them are still in trials, right? And it takes years and years for those to get into hospital. So if I was to kind of dampen our excitement a little bit, it would certainly be that. But I'm hoping we can speed things up a little bit.
Seems to be heading in that direction.
All right, Dan. So talking about another area where regulation is getting in the way. So the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, it just granted a college in Texas a construction permit for an advanced nuclear reactor. Why this is important is it's the first liquid salt filled reactor ever licensed by the NRC. So why does this matter, and why is a university or a college have a nuclear reactor?
You'll have to tell me why a college has a nuclear reactor, but this matters because it's innovation in nuclear. And the NRC is in the business of not approving things. They've, in their first 50 years of existence, they'd never approved a new design for a new nuclear reactor, right? So it's huge that they're finally allowing innovation again in nuclear. And, excuse me, specifically, this kind of reactor is supposed to be safer. The thought and the promise is that it won't and can't have meltdowns because it's made of molten salt. The fuel is already liquid. So a meltdown is when the fuel rods in a nuclear plant get too hot, the cooling system fails, and it melts down, and it can cause catastrophic effects. In a molten salt nuclear reactor, the fuel is already mixed into the molten salt. It's already liquid, so it can't have a meltdown. And the safety precautions are a lot simpler. They just put a plug in the bottom. If it gets too hot in there, the plug melts, the fuel comes out of the area that it's in, and then it hardens and it stops the reaction. So there's still a lot of innovation and experimentation and all that stuff to be done here, but I'm very happy to see innovation in nuclear because, again, we haven't seen much of it in 50 years.
And the problem with that is that when you're not allowed to innovate, when the product that you have to build has to be perfect and you kind of can't iterate to get there, it's just extremely hard. So you take something like nuclear, which has largely been stagnant for 50 years, versus something like solar, where the costs have declined over 99.5%. Why does that happen? Because we keep making huge amounts of solar panels and innovators say, oh, hey, I figured out a new way to make them better and faster and cheaper and more dense. And that process has been going on for over 40 years now. And that's why costs have basically dropped to 99.5%. and they've gotten denser so they can pull more energy from the sun. That process has been completely absent from nuclear. I hope this is the beginning of the NRC being a little more lenient. I know there's some more movement on the regulatory side of things, but yeah, it's a big deal.
And this is all spurred by big tech, right? So we had a 50-year freeze, a 50-year regulatory logjam in nuclear innovation, which was solely the fault of the NRC. But now big tech companies know that they need a lot more power to power their AI data centers. And you see they have influence, they have deep pockets. And 3 Mile Island, which is restarting, which they are going to start the restart soon, and I think it's supposed to start generating power by 2028. Microsoft has already signed a deal to buy all the power that 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor generates. And Amazon bought a data center connected to a nuclear power plant in central Pennsylvania. So big tech is sort of the force that's punching through this regulatory wall and saying, no, we need more power. We need to restart the innovation engine in nuclear.
Your home state of Pennsylvania, little energy superpower, right? When you think about it, we got the fracking and we got the nuclear turned back on.
Yeah, I guess so. I was in Pennsylvania this summer and I saw an anti-fracking sign actually, which kind of struck me because everybody must know by now, if they listen to us, that we think of fracking as an American miracle.
The best. The most underrated disruption, I think. Maybe just to separate this into two categories. On one hand, you have these innovative small reactors, like what this college in Texas is building. And there's multiple smaller modular reactor companies which are essentially making nuclear reactors small enough to fit in a garage or on the back of a truck, but powerful enough to give energy to a whole city. And then what you are talking about with the big tech companies is, we all know those big, huge cooling towers that sit on the edges of cities. Well, this century, America has closed down more nuclear power plants than it's opened. Big tech, because it needs that energy for the data centers, as you said, it's kind of spreading its influence around Washington and say, hey guys, this nuclear stuff isn't so bad. It's the cheapest, cleanest, the cleanest, safest, densest form of energy. Let's turn the reactors back on. And I think if we had talked about this a year ago, we would have just had, hey, there's some interesting things going on in the small nuclear reactors, but now we have the restarts happening again. So it's really, things are heating up from all sides. This is a trend we've been talking about since 2018.
Whenever we write about this, we get a bunch of questions about nuclear fusion. Is there anything to say about that, or is it still a little far-fetched?
It's one of those trends that's 10 years away, and it's been that way for 30 years. My personal take is that it's great that innovators are trying to build these things. So you have nuclear fission and nuclear fusion, and fusion is not here today, and fission is what we have with the existing power plants, and what I think 95% of the small modular reactors are doing. My take is that you just focus on the technology that's in front of us right now. It's hard enough to get a new power plant built or a design approved. As you said, this is the first new design the NRC has approved since 1974. Let's just focus on that, guys, and kind of leave the other stuff, would be my take.
Yeah, there's so much we can do. There's so much improvement to be made with the existing technology. We don't even really need to push the boundaries yet. We just need to catch up with the 50 years of innovation we haven't been doing.
Right. And that's, I think you still need to, the regulatory stuff is not solved by any means. Like, there's these crazy laws called ALARA, as low as reasonably achievable. And essentially what it does is, when a nuclear power plant innovates or, drives down costs, the NRC just says, hey guys, if there's any radiation at all, even though I'm taking a flight to Austin next week where I'm going to see you, I get way more radiation on that flight, or way more radiation in a normal chest scan in a hospital, than I would living next door to a power plant. Even that, the NRC says, no, we need to drive radiation down more and more and more. And this leads to a place where a part, steel or concrete or whatever, that goes into a nuclear power plant, it costs 50x, 100x more than a non-nuclear grade part. So this is a big problem when you're trying to build nuclear power plants at scale. So for me, the big thing here is that the big tech is going to kind of soften the regulators. That's what we need more than anything else.
All right, baby steps, right?
Right.
Man-made diamonds are now more popular in the U.S. than natural diamonds. Tell us why this is more important than just engagement rings sitting on fingers.
So yeah, as I think we can put the chart up on the screen right now. So 57% of diamonds sold in America are now made in a lab. So it takes around 3 billion years for diamonds to form in the Earth's crust. Scientists can make these in less than 3 hours in special microwaves in a lab. So I think this is cool. This is not something I knew. From an investor's point of view, you're disrupting one of the world's great monopolies with De Beers. But more than that, most of the diamonds do not end up on women's fingers. They end up in industry. So, oil and gas companies use them to drill through rock on the ground. And I think our friends over at Works in Progress, they wrote a great article about lab-grown diamonds recently. Said it's essentially the path to making much faster, much more powerful semiconductors. So the whole world runs on semiconductors these days. That could open up a whole world of disruption.
So De Beers has been forced to cut their prices of their natural diamonds by 40%. That's pretty significant. They've been a monopoly since the late 1800s. They've had 85% of the share of the world diamond market since the 1800s, I believe. And beyond that, where a lot of diamonds come from. There's a whole movie made about it called Blood Diamond, where it's about children being, horrible conditions, being forced to dig diamonds out of the mud for pennies or for free. So this is an awesome disruption all around. Maybe the only people who don't like it are the people who considered their wife's engagement ring an investment, because it's probably going to lose its value.
So I wanted to ask you a question about this. So today, diamond's huge status symbol. The bigger the diamond, the better. Now you can make... Not only are these lab-grown diamonds chemically, physically, and optically identical to diamonds that are made in the earth, natural diamonds. So for expert gemologists, they basically have to, those little scopes that they look at, they have to zoom in 20x on the zoom to be able to tell the difference. But even then, how they tell the difference is the lab-grown diamonds are more pure than the natural diamonds. So the question is, today they're this big status symbol, diamonds are forever, all these things. Do you think that 10 years down the line, diamonds get so cheap that just goes away?
Yeah. I mean, how could it go any other way? You look at the trend. Man-made diamonds are already cheaper than natural diamonds, and that's just going to continue. They're going to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper until hopefully anyone can afford a diamond.
So maybe the diamonds in a couple of years are like, I don't know if you know the English luxury brand Barbery. So back in the early 2000s, huge exclusive brand, and then, less than desirable people started wearing it, and it became like the anti-status symbol. Maybe big, huge diamonds are going to be like that. Whereas today, like you dinner with your wife, she says, "Look at the rock on that girl's finger." Now that's like 10 years down the line. That's a bad thing.
That's interesting. I was reading a lot about Ozempic lately, and one of the more interesting takes I came across is that it is. So when you see a very fit person today, you make assumptions about them, right? They're disciplined, they eat well, they exercise, and it's like a status symbol to be fit because it's challenging to be fit, right? And now Ozempic comes along, and maybe it's not that challenging. Maybe soon it won't be that challenging to be fit. So being fit loses its status symbol. I do see diamonds headed the same way. If anybody can afford them, something else will have to be a status symbol. What's the next status symbol? That's the big question.
I think the ultimate status symbol these days is a private jet or a yacht. I think like being able to fly private is a big flex, because you can't really fake it, right? You can't get like a fake, like a knockoff, like private jet.
Yeah. What about like for the masses though? Like the mass affluent who can't afford a private jet. What's the new diamond?
Kids. Having multiple kids.
I like that answer. Good answer.
Yeah, it's a good answer. This is completely off topic, but I basically think the problem with fertility is that having loads of kids has been an anti-status symbol in the past. I think we're going to turn it the other way. I think we're going to, when you see a guy with 5 kids, like, he must have tons of money.
It's
Whereas
true.
if I tell you one thing about someone today, they have 7 kids, you're probably not sure if you want to have dinner with that person. But in the future, it's going to change. It's going to change. Last thing on these, I remember Palmer Luckey talking about he wants to build subterranean vehicles. So basically these military vehicles that can dig, for example, a hole underground from the US to China, and then plant militaries right under the Chinese people's feet. And the Soviets and the Americans talked about this technology back in the 70s or the 50s and the 60s. The only way to do that is with the hardest naturally occurring material in the world, which is diamonds. So you'd imagine that when we get when lab-grown diamonds proliferate, you're going to get all this activity in the subterranean space. It's going to become like a land, sea, air, like a new type of warfare.
Yeah, we kind of got off topic there, but the physical properties of diamonds are unique. So when they become cheap, it's gonna disrupt a whole lot of stuff that we probably can't even imagine yet.
Right. So Dan, you talked last week about the letter that your school sent out. The school recently banned smartphones, and we promised to talk about the problem of smartphones and the problem of social media, specifically with kids, more this week. Just give us a little overview of why we're talking about this, why it's such a big deal, and what's going on.
Sure. So our school district here in Vermont, the entire school district, banned phones in schools. No tolerance policy. No phones allowed.
Hold on, I just want to stop you. What happens if the kid has a phone?
I don't know. They take it away, I would assume.
Right.
I don't know.
Okay.
But it's a small school and like a very close-knit community, so it's not the kind of thing where a kid could claim they didn't know. There's 31 kids in my son's entire grade. Like, everybody knows. He's only in first grade, by the way. He doesn't have a phone, but I was worried about this in the future, so I'm happy to see it. But anyway, there was a little bit of pushback. I would say generally the atmosphere was supportive of banning phones, but some of the kids didn't like it. Some of the parents weren't worried they wouldn't be able to get in touch with their kids during the school day. A couple months into the school year, rave reviews all around. Teachers love it, parents love it, even the kids love it. And that's because you can't, if a parent sends their kid to school without a phone and all the other kids have one, that doesn't work. That's bad for the kid. That means they can't communicate with their friends. That means they're left out. But if no kids have phones, they all have to talk to each other, and they all have to go back to communicating like we did when we were kids. So it's been great across the board.
Amazing. I think Gavin Newsom in California just signed a piece of legislation in all California schools from July 1st, 2026 onwards. They're going to restrict cell phone use. So not soon enough in my view, but I think this is a big deal. And just to take people inside why we're talking about this, you can see the chart on the screen here. So it shows the major depression among teens, and you can see for girls it's up 145% since 2010, and for boys it's up 161% since 2010. This is basically the most depressed, anxious, suicidal generation in history. And it all started around 2010, 2012, you could argue. What's so special about that period is when half of Americans got iPhones for the first time, Facebook pivoted to its mobile-first strategy, and you got the front-facing camera for the first time, so you could take selfies and share all these things. And as Jonathan Haidt laid out in his book, The Anxious Generation, and others of Jean Twenge and others have talked about, through a process of elimination, you settle on it having to be the smartphone. Something clearly changed in those years, and the only reasonable explanation is the smartphone and social media, right?
I think so. And beyond that, you just kind of know as a parent. You see kids. I know you know several teenagers, and I do too, who used to be happy and engaged, and they get phones, they get sucked into social media, and it completely changes their personality. So I guess you can never have a giant double-blind study that proves for certain that phones are the reason kids are more depressed and more anxious and all the other negative side effects today. But I'm convinced, and there's still a lot of skeptics around this, but I don't get it. I don't feel like there's any real legitimate reason to be skeptical.
Yeah, just to take the other side into account, the studies are all over the place on this one. Some studies say there's no correlation, others say there's a high correlation. And actually, the big pushback against John Haidt's book was that it didn't specifically nail down the causation factor. So, correlation is not causation. But as you said, this is one where I don't need the studies. You see it with your own eyes. So I feel like, maybe people are asking why we're talking about such a negative, pessimistic topic on this podcast. One of the big things is that sometimes these things come along in societies that are not good, and what we need to do is adjust as a society. And I think the banning of phones, whether it's in Vermont or California, this is the adjustment that we need.
Yeah. So most of the studies, I would say the overwhelming majority of the studies show a positive correlation between poor mental health and overuse of social media. A lot of the studies do show, maybe we can put a couple of the graphs on the screen, they show that kids who use zero social media, teens who use zero social media, they're at a baseline. And then if they do like 1 hour a week or some very reasonable amount, it actually improves their overall mental health by a little bit. And then when you get past that hump, then it starts to plummet off a cliff. So, I mean, all things in moderation, right? That's what that says to me.
I think we need to bring back the social stigma of shame. Because I remember, I'll give you a funny story. When my wife was young, her parents used to drink in the pub, and the kids would have to be out of the pub by 8 o'clock. So while they finished their drinks, could be for an hour, could be for 2 hours, they told the kids to wait outside in the archway of the pub next door. Can you imagine doing that today? Leaving your kids out in the cold while you finish your alcoholic drink, and then maybe, not that they did this, but then maybe getting in the car with your kids driving home after you've had 8 pints of Guinness or whatever. Unacceptable today. No way. That's, I think, where we need to go with viewing parents that give kids to their phones, because we know the destructive effects. So I'm all for bringing back the shame.
Me too. Even though I know this, I still find and setting a good example for your kids is really important too. Like, right. You need to not be on your own phone when you're supposed to be engaged with them. So even knowing this, and even being at the extreme end of disliking smartphones and social media and its effect on kids and adults too, still find myself glancing at my phone when I should be focused on my kids. It's hard. It's very addictive, and it's hard. So some good advice is to find a place in your house after work's over, put the phone in that place, just leave it there.
Completely agree. Well, it's an excellent tip, and I think just to make this concrete, because sometimes you're doing it, you might catch yourself doing it. Say, yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just think of, again, we know lots of individual cases. You're in America, I'm in Ireland, so it's not like we live in the same town or whatever. I know lots of cases where the kid was a great kid, did great at school, beautiful, and then they get a phone, and a couple of years later, they're either depressed or they're fighting with their parents, or they're just down a really wrong road. So if you ever catch yourself, just remember, the kids, monkey see, monkey do. And it really does matter what you're doing.
All right, last topic for today. The largest and most extensive study on universal basic income concluded over the summer. The results are not great. So let me give you the details. It was called the Unconditional Cash Study. It was funded by OpenAI, which is the creator of ChatGPT. They gave $1,000 a month to low-income families earning under $30,000 a year. So a significant raise in how much money they took home. And these families were in Texas and Illinois. The hypothesis of researchers, they expected and they hoped that the people who received the money, no strings attached, would ultimately get better jobs because of it, because theoretically it should give them a cushion where they don't have to take a crappy job just to make ends meet, or it would give them more time or money to go back to school or pursue training or what have you. That was the hypothesis. That is not at all what happened. So here are some of the results. So they compared it to a control group who only received $50 a month. The UBI participants, they stayed unemployed for an extra month compared to the control group. They worked less, and there were no substantive changes in the quality of employment. The UBI participants self-reported increased rates of disability that limited the work they could do. They ultimately earned less, and here's the kicker, they went into more debt than the control group, which ultimately hurt their net worth.
Conclusion, not good. Not good. I mean, I think this is the secret to happiness is not money or not free time. It's earned success and hard work. I think people have this idea that when all the work is complete or when they're retired or whatever, or if they don't have to work, they'll be happy. And I think even though we work very hard, we know that's not the case, right? And I think this study just proves it. So I think it's scary. I think the idea of UBI or people sitting around having all this free time, it's actually scary. Could end the world.
I agree. Idle hands are the devil's workshop, right? People think they want their life to be a vacation, but it is not what actually makes people happy. So why was the study conducted in the first place? I mentioned it was funded by OpenAI, which created ChatGPT. So there's this looming worry out there that pretty soon an irreversible trend is going to start where AI just starts picking off everybody's jobs one by one. And eventually the machines are going to do all the jobs. There's not going to be enough jobs left for people to do. So how do we take care of the people who don't have jobs? We give them free money. Which, like you said, is scary, because being given money and not having to strive or work, while it sounds nice, especially when you work 60 hours a week and struggle to make ends meet, it sounds really nice, but it's ultimately not what makes people happy. It's just not.
There's so many examples of billionaires that create all this amazing wealth. They struggle, they come from nothing, and then they pass it to their kids. And within a few generations, the money is squandered, or the kids are drug addicts or whatever. I don't think anyone. I'm sure there's some cases of them avoiding that fate, but I don't think anyone has actually figured it out. I remember Charlie Munger. I think it was either in an interview or someone asked him, like, what do you do? Like, you have these billions of dollars. Do you give it to your kids? And he said, you have to, otherwise they'll hate you, but it's not good for them.
There's a whole hit show called Succession about this idea, right?
Right. It's the perfect example.
You look at lottery winners, you check back on them in 5 years, more often than not, they're miserable,
and some of them even broke after winning hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yep.
So the good news is I actually don't think AI is going to replace all the jobs. I think if you look back at every technology in history, it's absolutely taken some jobs, but it's created more jobs than it's replaced. And the way I think about this, there was a study done on the US Census in the 1950s, and just one of the 270 jobs was completely replaced. So yes, AI will replace tasks, but hopefully it then frees you up to do higher level tasks that create more value for society. So I think the nurse and the doctor is a great example of this. So the doctor used to do everything, and now you go in, you don't have to see a doctor to get your bloods taken or your blood pressure or whatever. So that's the way I see this all playing out.
Well, we're more technologically advanced than we've ever been, right? There's more automation than there's ever been, and the unemployment rate in the US is lower than it's ever been. So kind of all you need to know, right?
Right. I was reading this book on the history of Saudi Arabia, and I think the founder, Ibn Saud, he had something like 100 kids. And you read about these Saudi princes living in gold palaces with all the money in the world, and they were miserable. And it's just a reminder that hard work and earned success is really what creates happiness. And let's throw this stupid idea of UBI in the trash. Yeah,
I second that.
So I'm gonna finish with a big dose of optimism. So I'm going to show an image on the screen, and on the left hand side you can see a young looking Elon Musk hunkered down staring at a pile of twisted metal. So this is from one of SpaceX's first failed launches. I think it was 17 years ago. So this is when the company was Elon. It's easy to look back now. SpaceX, most valuable private company in the world, $210 billion. It's, single-handedly creating the space economy. But the early days of SpaceX were rough. First 3 launches failed. They only had money for one more launch, one more roll of the dice, and that was it. And if that failed, it was bankrupt. Nearly bankrupted Elon. He had to borrow money to pay rent, yet he pulled it off. And here we are today. SpaceX is going to get us to Mars. So just an incredible story, and just an inspirational story of entrepreneurship and innovation.
The story of how SpaceX has single-handedly opened up a new space economy, which is leading to things like new drugs, new ways to make like a human meniscus was printed in space lately, because you can only do that in microgravity. For the full story on that, go to rationaloptimistsociety.com and read Stephen and I's latest article. It's really exciting. Elon's SpaceX has reduced the cost of space travel by 95%, which is really the key reason why we can do all these things in space that we couldn't do before.
Amazing. Good way to end.
All right, for more discussions like this, hit the subscribe button. Stephen, I'll see you in Austin next week.
See you soon, Dan.